Welcome back to Tac Ops, episode 5.
Yep, and I feel like we've done a lot of Ukraine stuff, especially on my channel overall, so we would switch it up this time. And one thing we've talked about the last couple days, was nuclear war in general.
Right.
I always kind of found it interesting because, sort of start out, nuclear weapons were kind of built to win a war, right? Like the end of World War II. For the most part, people thought about these as giant bombs. That's it, just real big bombs. Then the US built thousands, literally tens of thousands. The Soviet Union built tens of thousands. And it kind of shifted to a point of deterrence. You didn't have these weapons to win a war, you had them to not fight the war in the first place. But it goes further than that, because the world just doesn't end, with a nuclear war. Especially depending on, how many nuclear weapons are used and all that. You want to also have a deterrence and an ability to keep fighting after a nuclear war or during a nuclear war. So there was always the fear in a nuclear war or in a nuclear scenario during the Cold War that one side would get some sort of first strike weapon and be able to take out all the other nukes on the ground. So you also wanted to still have a reliable conventional deterrent to further dissuade. So even if, for example, the US was able to somehow figure out how to take out all the Soviet nukes before they could launch, you also still wanted to keep a conventional deterrent so you can still convince the U.S. not to ever do that in the first place. So I found an article, an old CIA document, and it was actually a stolen Soviet document originally written that the CIA was talking about how the Soviets planned to keep fighting a war after or during a nuclear war. And it's interesting because, as we know, as we've seen in Ukraine, for example, we've seen that Russia relies heavily on rail lines to be able to transport all their equipment, especially tanks, which this article focused mostly on. Especially ever since World War II, the Soviets moved everything back, because Germany obviously invaded. So all the factories, all the warehouses, everything is kind of further back east of Moscow. That way they couldn't, get destroyed. They could keep building up more weapons to be able to fight in the event of another war like that. So they have to transport all these tanks and all this equipment from east of Moscow, way out by the Urals. I mean, you're talking about 1,000, 2,000, potentially even 3,000 kilometers that these tanks would then have to travel to the front line. And without rail lines, assuming that those would be targeted in a nuclear war, you knock out all the rail lines, that means these tanks would have to travel. Nowadays, they could transport them by trucks. There are big enough trucks now, but it's not very efficient. Especially to move a large number of vehicles, tanks in particular, and also over that long distance. So a lot of them would just have to be driven. And especially back then, we're talking about not like 2,000 tanks like they got now. We're talking about 10, 20,000 tanks. So can you imagine that? 20,000 tanks pretty much driving thousands of kilometers across. And then that's just to get to the front. And then they have to, fight their way through another potential 1,000 kilometers. And the big issue then was maintenance.
And fuel. I don't know what the old Soviets ran off of, probably gasoline or diesel. I mean, like, holy cow, like how much? Just massive amounts of tanks you would need to carry the fuel. And then once you get it off the rail line, how do you get it from there to the battlefield to refuel them? Because if they go out and fight and win and come back, you still got to refuel them or they're going to be dead in the water right there, right? So it's, oh man, just the logistics of that much land machinery is unimaginable to me. I can't imagine it.
Yeah, but especially if they're driving though, like on roads, you got thousands of tanks driving on roads, thousands of kilometers. I mean, most tank tracks are only supposed to last, 2 to 4,000 kilometers before they have to be replaced. Like they're supposed to be completely replaced. And then the engines and the transmission and everything, like the whole tank is supposed to be completely overhauled, maybe 6,000 to 8,000 kilometers. All these tanks driving, you'd have to stop and have them, be maintained and fixed and, have stuff repaired every single night after they're driving hundreds of kilometers a day. So if a track lasts at best 4,000 kilometers before it needs to be replaced on a tank, just to get from the warehouse or the base or the factory that the tank is built at, by the time it gets to the front, it needs new tracks. And those tracks can weigh several tons each. So you're talking about all the fuel and then on top of that, all the maintenance and all the repair stuff, and have trucks carrying all these extra tracks and engines too. I mean, you could talk about hundreds and hundreds of engines having to be replaced, just like nonstop. So like the amount of maintenance that would have to be done, it would just be incredible.
Эти заплаты уже были поставлены во время ремонта в полевых условиях. Все танки ремонтировались в полевых условиях в то время, и затем отправлялись опять на фронт.
But this is all stuff they plan for in the event of a nuclear war.
Planning is I think the big key to that, right? Because if you are in charge of a machinery division, you plan on basically nothing happening, right? Because if you are in charge of a machinery division and you have a tank, well, if that tank gets shot, the maintenance is going to be a lot different than it just going out and running and then coming back and nothing ever happening to it, right?
Right.
So, what do you say, 4,000 kilometers?
Per tank track to be replaced.
Per tank track. Well, that's based on like a nominal condition. That's if you have the tracks. That's if you're not in a war. That's if the tank isn't getting shot at, right? Nominally, if you have a tank track that gets shot by, let's say, a bullet, well, you want to replace it, right? Because that bullet hole could eventually wear on the tracks, wear the gears down, and then wear everything else out, and then you have this big giant problem with the tank. In terms of wartime, all of that shit goes out the window.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's all about what do I need to get the mission done to get it done. And can I replace those tracks? Sure. Do I have the tracks? No. Well, you better get your ass out there with that broke ass track and try to get this job done, because if not, we're going to get killed.
Yeah.
You know, so you have to deal with, maintenance is always this kind of like ebb and flow of wartime. So if it's not in wartime, you get pretty good maintenance. I was a machinist mate, so I did a lot of maintenance. That was my job in the Navy. Doing maintenance in the United States is awesome. We got a lot of money, we got a lot of resources. We have shore capability, like in terms of the Navy. You have this infrastructure built around maintenance. But if you take those assets and you put them in Russia, you don't have that infrastructure that's built in ground, right? Like on home turf, right? It's almost like playing football. If you're on home turf, you got a lot of advantages, right? Because everybody's for you.
Sure.
But if you take all that and you take it to Russia, you don't have that anymore. So you have to now move all this maintenance. If you have the capability, it will work. But what we've seen from countries that historically haven't taken care of their stuff, right? If you look at Russia, look at the reactor program, right? All the constant issues they've had with the reactor program, the constant issues they've had with maintenance and corruption, same thing with China, right? They're not going to get that same type of reliability out of their machinery as they need to.
Did you ever have to deal with this in the Navy? They often talk about a difference between preventative maintenance, that's maintenance you do ahead of time, like in your car. Change your oil, that way nothing bad happens later on, right? And then restorative maintenance. That's where something already went wrong and now you have to repair the thing.
So that's a machinist mate's life. It's basically built around two things. It's preventative maintenance, what they call PMS, or the PMS, the preventative maintenance system.
Yeah.
So like, let's say you have like on our submarine we had scrubbers, right? So you gotta maintain this machinery. Here is a document that's going to tell you every day what you got to do, every week what you got to do, every quarter, every year what you got to do. And sometimes you got to replace oil, sometimes you got to do this or right. But corrective maintenance is while you're running, well, this light bulb's broken. Like, where do we get that? We got to find this light bulb. So now you got to find the light bulb. You got to bring it in, right? Preventative maintenance and corrective maintenance is a completely different ballgame.
Sure, yeah.
Because preventative maintenance is always planned for. You should never send a machine out and not be able to take care of it. It's like, would you drive your car and not be able to take care of the oil in it?
Yeah. And it's an easy thing to skimp on too, especially during peacetime, right? When you want to try to save money, you just kind of cut back some of the preventative maintenance you do, right? And it's an easy, quick way to save money, but I think I was looking at charts and stuff and they were talking about how preventative maintenance is actually like multiple times cheaper than restorative maintenance. It's cheap. It's more expensive in the short term, but if you don't keep that stuff up, kind of like your car, you don't change the oil, it's going to save you some money not having to have to get an oil change every 6 months or whatever. But if you don't do it, then all of a sudden your whole engine, you're going to have a lot of serious problems that are going to be extremely costly. A lot more than it would have cost just to keep replacing your oil every 6 months.
But you roll that dice. It's like not paying for your insurance for your car. Like, what if you don't get into a wreck? What if your engine doesn't seize up? What if we come up with a new way to check the oil to see if it is failing, right? Because if you look at like your car and the oil in your car, you're supposed to do it every so many miles, right? And in the military, it's the same way. But at the same time, like when we had our diesel engine on our 688, we didn't have an hourly change out. Like if we ran the diesel on our 688, we didn't change the oil out so many hours, so many running hours. We changed it out when we inspected it and it needed to be changed, because you inspect the oil and you can check the viscosity of it, you can check it if it has water in it, you can check all these different things, and if it hasn't failed these parameters, you just keep running. So there's no real hour time limit, because every engine's different, especially if it's an older engine. It's going to wear out a lot quicker, right, compared to a newer one. When you have a system that doesn't make sure that you even have the right parts, right? Think about the thresher. This is a construction issue, right, and kind of a maintenance issue. The Scorpion's the same thing, right? They didn't do the things they were supposed to do when they were supposed to do them. And then we lost the thresher. We lost the Scorpion because the thresher was just like, it was rags in the air compression system. Like there was just like this like really dumb things that failed because there was just nobody to check that thing, right? So you have to have not only the maintenance side, but you have to have the quality side of it, right? What makes the United States Submarine Force so special is the SubSafe program, because the SubSafe program is a maintenance program and an upkeep program, but it is also a quality program to make sure that when you change this filter out, you make sure that it's this filter, it's made of this material, it came from this company, it was inspected by this guy's qualified to put it in, this guy's qualified to watch you do it, this guy's qualified to make sure that you can even do that in the first. There's like 25 steps before you even go in and start changing these, just like an O-ring. You know, you change an O-ring on a torpedo tube.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it'll take you 2 or 3 days to go through the process of making sure that that is the right thing, because if you put the wrong O-ring in that torpedo tube, it'll blow out, and now you've got a flooding problem in the middle of a mission, right?
Yeah, the thing about this article, though, I thought was so interesting is that's assuming all that the Soviets were keeping up to date on all that stuff.
Right.
That's assuming all their preventative maintenance was perfect. They had the right O-rings, they had the inspections, everything was being swapped out. Even then, again, if they lose rail lines, I mean, just the amount of maintenance that would have to be done just to keep these things running was absolutely insane. You'd have to have all these mobile, tank repair battalions, or I'll link to the article. It's a pretty interesting read. But you'd have to have all this stuff moving along with them. Again, thousands of kilometers across the Soviet Union, another 1,000 kilometers into combat. They're talking about an estimate 10% of all tanks in a major, war would probably break down on the first day, or needs at least some form of repair. Swapping out all the engines. Again, we're talking about tens of thousands of tanks, not a couple thousands of tanks.
Another thing to think about too is corrective maintenance takes a hell of a lot longer to do than preventative maintenance. So if you're going to go in and change this O-ring, here's a procedure. Step 1 or 2, you just go out, you've already got the tools, you're already in like a nice area.
It takes you an hour or whatever.
It's like changing your oil, right?
Sure.
But if you don't change your oil and now you've got to replace your engine, that's going to take days or
rip
weeks.
It apart, and try to figure out what's wrong with it if you don't have replacement engines.
And so, I mean, if you have stuff that's breaking down on the first day, I mean, it could cause you a lot of issues, and it's going to cost you a lot more time. And you need to have people that are skilled to do that, right? Because if you just have somebody that's just new to the military, sure, they can change oil, but how do they know that this is the cause of this issue? You have to have skilled labor come in with experience to show you why this is the problem. On our boat, we spent days underway trying to maintain something because we didn't know what to do. We were just operators. Generally, when it comes to the Navy, they're just operators. They're trying to do maintenance, but they're not like, you don't know everything. You try to come back into port and let the shipyard come in because you have a shipyard worker that's been there for 30 years that knows everything about these things. And they know these little tricks and, whatever. And so you can pull that off, but you have to have not just resources, not just parts. You got to have skilled labor. You got to have experience. You have to have this entire infrastructure basically move in without a roof.
And this is all stuff they planned for in the event of a nuclear war. A lot of scenarios of World War III was going to be fought in Europe, obviously. So the Soviets, if they have all their equipment and bases, all that stuff east, of Moscow near the Urals, that's a lot further to go to get to Germany than it is with the U.S. and NATO, who had a lot of their stuff pre-positioned already in Western Europe.
Right.
So they wouldn't have had as much of a problem. But I thought it was fascinating, though, all the talk about fighting a war after a nuclear war. Because most people, I think, you think about nuclear war, and that's it. You're like, okay, that's the end of the world, right? That's it. There's no point. Both sides lost. Everyone's going to stop. But no, there were serious plans and a lot of discussion about how to be able to keep fighting in a nuclear war and after a nuclear war.
Right.
Which was another thing we were talking about before, too. Being that you were on a submarine, we were talking about what you would do if, you were submerged and then suddenly you surfaced and you found out, a nuclear war had happened 6 hours earlier.
Yeah, it's a lot different because, we live in the Dallas area, so we're probably going to be wiped out by fallout or something, right? So, but, being a machinist mate on a submarine and you're in the middle of, a box in the Pacific and you're way away from everything and then you pop up because you're supposed to pop up every 8 hours or whatever your mission is to come up and transmit and get radio messages and everything else.
Sure.
Let's say it's every day, right? So you come up on Tuesday and there's no radio messages. There's nothing. Like you don't get anything. And you're like, what the hell's going on? So you pull back and you get a little bit closer to land and you figure out that the United States is gone. Hawaii's gone. Like Guam's gone. Russia's gone. China's gone. Like, what do you do? Like, where do you even go from there? Because you're going to live at least 90 days. Let's say you just left Hawaii and you got a full loadout for a mission,
Food and
right?
everything, yeah.
You got 90 days. You got unlimited power. You got unlimited water, right? The only thing you really got to worry about is just food. Where do you go? We would always like sit around the torpedo room and kind of joke around and stuff. And I feel like everybody came to the same consensus that you would probably go to the south side of South America.
Okay, yeah.
Or, if you really wanted to roll the dice, you could go somewhere in Africa. There's just not a lot of resources in Africa. And South Africa could possibly get nuked because they had nukes at one time.
Right. But the theory is kind of South America, at least, might be less touched or have less fallout.
Well, remember, the primary strike is going to be take out their nukes so you don't get nuked, right? So you just shoot their nukes and they shoot your nukes, and that's the main shot, right? And then you have the secondary shot, which is a SSBN or somebody else kind of cleaning up after that. And then it's supposed to go conventional, right, if there's anything left. But there's nothing in South America. There's never been any nukes in South America. So South America should be probably much untouched. Yeah. Maybe Brazil, they may have their naval port get hit or something like that, but there's just nothing there. Like Argentina doesn't have anything, Chile doesn't have anything. Like there's just nothing there besides Brazil. So South America would probably be a pretty sweet spot to like prop up and say, hey, look, we got a reactor. We don't have the food, but we got all the power you need for the next 20 years. We could power your town for at least 10.
Yeah.
And as long as you feed us for the next 10 years, we got a deal, right?
Yeah. Then restart civilization from there, I guess. It's funny because after World War II, it's where a lot of the Germans who escaped, being arrested and charged with war crimes. Obviously, a lot of them went down to Argentina and stuff like that. Same thing.
Argentina's just so disconnected. And it's
not too foreign either. Like a lot of people from the U.S. or Russia trying to go to Africa, that's a much different culture, obviously, right? Yeah, you go down to South America, they speak, Portuguese, Spanish. At least it's more similar that way. I feel like it would, be an ideal place, I guess, to escape to.
Yeah, and I'm sure they would love the income and commerce and everything that comes with it. But at the same time, it's like, where else are you going to get power for 10 years? Especially in Argentina. You're never going to get power from anywhere else.
And if the rest of the world is destroyed, you can't rely on anyone else, bringing in any supplies or equipment or anything.
Maybe if you're burning wood from Brazil, they're just tearing the Amazon apart, who knows? But I feel like South America would probably be the best place to go. It'd probably be your best bet. That's what we always kind of just agreed on. That or like Colombia or some kind of like,
sure.
If you really want to like not be a part of America and its values anymore, and you want to go to a spot that's like North Korea, I'm sure you could probably pop up there pretty quick.
What was that movie? World War Z? I think World War Z, that's North Korea was kind of like they figured was the last untouched one where all the zombies, because it was so, isolated. Or The Last Ship, we were talking about that earlier too, that show. It was based on a book, which is a little bit different than the show, but I think they end up going to Antarctica.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to go
Because
to
I
Antarctica.
guess the world melted the
Maybe
the
the
caps
ice
or
was
whatever.
melted. But I mean, the other thing too is, okay, you got a submarine and you have unlimited nuclear power, essentially, but you still have stuff break down.
Oh yeah.
You know, you're still gonna have to get replacement parts, which you're not gonna be able to get, you know, in the event there was a nuclear war.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about a very complex system, right? So, I mean, if you have a nuclear-powered submarine, which is a very specific piece of machinery, that's running a nuclear reactor, which is, let's say it's a S5G or S6G or whatever it is, it's a very specific piece of machinery, and this primary valve fails, where do you get that?
Yeah.
You can't just make that. You can't just make a primary valve. You can't make these very specific pieces of, you know, especially if you need like special metals or special rubbers, materials, you know, these things that you have to put in, especially when it comes to the reactor system. Like, you can't just
Go in there and yeah.
And what do? Do you just run it and say, fuck it, like this thing's leaking, but whatever, we need power?
Yeah.
You can't do that. Like 3 Mile Island and everything else, like we've had, you know, obvious problems in the past where it's not worth it anymore. Now it's even worse.
And that stuff happens all the time, though, too. I think you were talking about how times you've had to, you know, pull back into port, like right when you went underway.
Yeah, because there's more than just a reactor, right? You have to have compressed air for a submarine. It's not going to emergency blow unless you have compressed air. There's a lot of valves, there's a lot of machinery that operates on compressed air. So if you don't have compressed air, the system's going to start losing vital systems, right? Because generally when it comes to machinery, it comes down to vital and non-vital systems. And then it comes to like just whatever systems. But you lose vital systems, that's when it gets really hairy, because now you can't sustain atmosphere, you can't sustain energy, you can't sustain safety, you can't, you know, maybe something's going to catch on fire, you know, who knows, man.
Yeah.
We've seen a lot of fires in the Navy,
Yeah.
the U.S. Navy recently with the Bonham Richard, and then the collisions with the John McCain and the Fitzgerald. There's a lot of issues that the Navy's dealing with, not just with fire, but just in training in general. If you don't squash those issues, they can cause a lot of problems, especially if, you know, we're talking about nuclear warfare where the system fails, right?
Yeah.
Without the system, you're relying on your environment, and if your environment is a piece of shit, it's not maintained, nobody's trained, nobody knows what to do, it could cause a lot of problems, right? And so, and I say a piece of shit, I say that not with a light sense, but I hate to say it. The condition that the Bonham Richard was in was a shithole in terms of damage control. You had over 800 fire extinguishers, and less than 20 of them worked.
Really?
How is that even possible? Think about anywhere you've ever worked in your entire life. Could you imagine if you walked into that place and they were like, oh, don't worry about that fire extinguisher. I know it doesn't work. I know it's broken, but
It's only a 2% chance it works.
now imagine you walk into that same building and all of them are gone. Imagine just like all the fire extinguishers are missing, or they're broken and they're on the ground, or they're like, you know, they sprayed everywhere, and there's only one out of 100 that work. Like,
Yeah.
what would you say about that? And now you're on a naval ship with weapons and explosives, and it's not really designed to be fireproof, and it's got hundreds, if not 1,000 people on it, and it's got other machinery that you don't know, and fuel, and I mean, jet fuel. I mean, that thing runs on jet fuel. I mean, it's like, it makes me so angry how bad that ship was in. Because as a machinist mate, I was an A-ganger on a submarine, and that was our job. We took care of the fire extinguisher, took care of the SCBAs, we took care of the FFEs, which is the firefighting ensembles, you know, the suits that the firefighters
Sure,
wear.
yeah.
We made sure that the tanks were compressed. We made sure that the firefighting hoses were taken care of. You know, that was our job, on top of maintaining all of the other bullshit on our sub. And so to hear that like less than 1% was even viable is unreal. And that wasn't even including, like, they had fire stations. They had like, I don't know how many fire stations. It was a lot, and it was less than like 10% even worked at the fire. And that was where the fire hoses were and everything else. Huh. And they had never trained with the local firefighters. So when the local firefighters came in,
They didn't know how to
they didn't know how to work
divide
together.
up the work, yeah.
When we talk about Russia and we talk about maintenance, like, is it taken care of? you could say that Russia can go in and take care of all this shit, but can they? Because when it comes to the United States, we've proven time and time again that we're not taking care of our own shit.
Yeah, that's the thing. Everyone criticizes Russia so much, and maybe they deserve it, maybe they don't, but it's also happening in the U.S. when you talk about preventative maintenance, or at least having things like fire extinguishers at work.
Fire extinguishers,
on
just
board.
The basic thing for you being at your workplace is just having a goddamn fire extinguisher there, right? Just having something there to put a fire out. In the U.S. Navy, when you go through boot camp, they put you through a firefighting scenario where you got to go out and fight fires and you got to do this thing.
Yeah.
But you're not even going to give these brand new people out of boot camp the basic tools that you've been training them on in a trainer? Like, you've given them fire extinguishers in a trainer, but not on an actual ship. The Navy blamed Ryan Mays. You go either way, right? Let's say you did it, right? If he set a fire on purpose, like on the USS Miami, where
the guy just wanted to get off of work early or something.
yeah,
right?
you have the civilian shipyard worker just sets a fire, throws it in a
Costs
rack,
$1 billion
right?
worth of damage.
Destroys the sub, right? Let's say he gets off with it, right? If you have less than 2% of your fire extinguishers working,
Yeah.
that's on you.
Yeah.
That's on you, right? Because you should at least be able to put out a local fire. You should be able to put out anything, right? But if everybody's running around and grabbing fire extinguishers that don't work, or that aren't there, or that they're not trained to even know how to use. So I actually looked up the numbers. So out of the Bonham Richard fire, 29 out of the ship's 216 fire stations worked. I tried to actually look up a picture of a fire station, but I couldn't find one at all. I'm assuming it's fire hoses and everything else. 15 out of 807 fire extinguishers were inspected and worked.
It's less than 2%.
1.8%. The 1MC was broken. So the 1MC is the main announcement system that like only the captain can use. Like nobody talks on the 1MC unless you're like an official, like it goes to everything, right?
Yeah.
The 1MC was broken, so when they were calling away fires,
They couldn't get it out to everyone?
it was only going to like very specific spots, like this one room or this one room, because they were in maintenance and everything was cut. The other thing was there was no co-op training with the firefighters like we talked about, but the last one was that the doors were fouled with temporary systems. So when you're in a dry dock scenario or some kind of maintenance scenario, they'll actually open the doors and run wires, like temporary power, temporary air, right? Let's say that you have to cut the power off to this entire room to replace the sonar in it, but you need lighting. So they'll run temporary lighting in there, but they gotta foul the door so you can't shut the door anymore, right? So when they had fires going through, they couldn't isolate the doors and shut the doors to shut the oxygen off, right? Because a lot of surface ships fight flooding similar to fires, where you can actually shut the oxygen off, like just like you shut the flooding off. You can
Put out the fire, yeah.
Yeah, you can shut the oxygen off, and it may not put the fire out, but it'll slow it down a lot, especially if you can't get in there and fight it. And they couldn't do that, so the entire ship was just kind of open,
kept burning, huh?
right? And it just kept going from compartment to compartment because there was probably lighting and temporary ventilation and whatever else is going through there. You know, when I was on the Hampton, we went through a period like that, and it was like that. We had lighting and power and stuff that went through the hatch. So if the ship just or the boat just decided to sink, I can't shut the hatch because there's like lighting and power and stuff coming through the hatch. Like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. So you just kind of have to deal with it, and that's another reason. So when you have a ship, they have a fire main, and they have generally they have specific pumps that are dedicated to just that firefighting system. And the Bonham Richard only had 2 out of I don't know how many pumps, 11 and 12, so at least 12. And those were the only 2 that were actually operational when the fire started. And they had to shut power off to it because they were trying to isolate the compartment to that part of the ship. So they had to basically shut the shore power off to that part of the ship to stop the fire. And at the same time, they stopped the firefighting pumps. So, yeah, it was just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, just systematic failures from top to bottom. So the Navy has what they call I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's SAFFIR, and it's this It's, you see that robot that Boston Dynamics has that's like flipping over and jumping across beams and stuff, and looks like it's doing gymnastics.
Yeah.
The Navy has one that is not anywhere near that can barely go. Basically, they just put a fire hose in its hand, and it just gradually walks up to it, and it looks ridiculous. It looks so dumb. It's never going to survive anything. I mean, this is also a couple years ago, but...
Yeah. Well, I mean, they have to build it different. They couldn't send the Boston Dynamics one in there because it has to be fireproof. It has to be able to withstand all this stuff.
Right. Surface ships also have DCmen, right? They have damage control. They have a rating for damage control. Like, your job in the Navy is damage control. That's what you're going to do. You're not going to be a machinist mate. You're not going to work on nuclear reactors. Your job is to maintain damage control equipment and fight fires and flooding and whatever it is. You're the main purpose for that. And so those people don't know what to do. There's no maintenance that's getting done. Everything's failed. Like, what do you do? This is supposed to be the greatest naval military in existence, and we can't even maintain a few fire extinguishers?
Yeah, it's funny because I see a lot of parallels again with Russia. So not long ago, a few days ago, actually on New Year's, literally the minute after the New Year started, Ukraine launched a strike against a building, a vocational school, that had, the numbers vary, somewhere around 100, some people say up to 600 Russian mobilized troops inside, and they all died. So it was a massive screw up. Somebody screwed up bad. And at least right now, Russia, the Ministry of Defense and the government are blaming the mobilized people for it. They said that they snuck in cell phones, which could be tracked, which again, kind of like, talking about the Bonham Richard. It is true, I guess, if they did have cell phones and Ukraine can track those and figure out that there's a whole bunch of them in one area, let's hit that spot. But at the same time, the real fault would be on the commanders and the people that decided to put everyone in one area and not spread them out, you know what I mean? And also not only that, but supposedly they had ammunition and fuel all stored in the same building.
Right.
So when it got hit, the whole thing went up.
So there's a document called the Major Fires Review that goes through all the fires that the Navy's had in the past. Man, it's been it goes back a long time. And then there's another document that goes through all the accidents between 1945, so right after World War II, all the way to 1988. And so if you go through all these documents, you find out that a lot of it's just systemic. A lot of it is they have allowed the system to fail, because if the system is only as good as the people that run the system, right? So you can sit there and sign off everything all you want to. It doesn't matter. As long as your signature's on there, you don't give a shit, you throw it up, right? But unless there's somebody that comes back and double checks that, right? Unless there's a system that comes back and says, I don't know, we need to just kind of double check everybody to make sure everything's okay, right? I learned that a lot because I was a quality assurance supervisor on the Hampton. So I was in charge of all of the quality assurance maintenance. I was in charge of a lot of really high quality maintenance. And I would never, ever, ever, ever allow somebody to just go, yeah, that's what it's supposed to be. Oh, okay, well, that's cool, whatever. But I could have done that. I could have saved myself so much time. I could have gone home early, hours and hours and hours every day.
That's the thing, yeah, it's so tempting.
Because I just signed it, and I don't care.
It's so tempting to skip over stuff like that.
And especially if you have a command that says, you need to do that. And that's how I feel the Bonham Richard went through, because there was... If you go through the documents, essentially they try to kind of bring it back to one officer who was signing everything off, but he explains what am I supposed to do? They don't give me the things I'm supposed to. If I don't do this, I'm going to get kicked out of the Navy. They didn't give me an option. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to just sign it off, right? I don't give a fuck anymore, right? The Hampton, we went through the same thing. So my second captain was fired because we were supposed to be doing daily water inspections for the reactor. So the nukes will go back there, they'll check the reactor water, they'll bring it to the captain and he'll sign it off saying it's all okay. And our captain was a piece of shit. He was an asshole. I've talked about this in previous podcasts, and I don't want to drop derogatory terms if I don't have to, but the first time he ever walked into our ship, he was like, "Are you guys eating curly fries?" We're like, "Yeah, it's hamburger day. We got curly fries and hamburger." Like, well, you guys are a bunch of F-bombs.
Yeah.
You know,
A gay slur.
yeah, because you guys are eating curly fries. And I swear to God, we never curly fries after that, right? It was just like, if you walk in and you have this command climate that's just miserable, you're going to get misery. And those guys hated him so much, they just started signing his name off. They just started signing his signature. The captain's signature. They stole a pen, because the captain has a special pen.
Yeah.
They stole his pen, signed it, and then would just like deliver it to everybody else. And the captain didn't even notice it, because he was such an asshole and hated everybody. And it was all because he didn't want to wake up. That was it. He didn't want to wake up at 6 a.m. and sign it. So he would tell him to fuck off. And that's what they would do. And they signed his name. And so you're talking about a reactor. You're talking about a reactor, a naval ship that I was on. You know, who knows what could have happened if those guys really didn't give a shit, right? Luckily, those guys, I mean, all those guys that did that, the nukes that did that, those guys were amazing. I will swear to death that those guys were amazing guys. That captain deserved every damn thing he got, and it sucks that the system failed because of that. But that's people, right? You put people in the mix, the system's going to fail eventually. But how is it going to fail? Hopefully it fails because of reasons that you can easily fix.
Right.
Most of the time it's not. It's mostly...
You don't know about it until it all blows up in your face. Yeah.
If everybody does their job, everything gets done usually. The system's generally set up to always win. But you have to make sure that every step of the way works.
Right.
You know, and if these people are corrupt, or these people don't give a shit, or you know, these people take money, or you know, these people just hate everybody else and don't want to do it, your system's going to fail. It's more than just putting a list together. You have to have motivation. You have to have resources. You have to have like people wanting to just be there. You know,
Yeah.
like that guy that set the Miami on fire. He just didn't want to be there. He just wanted to go home. And we lost billions of dollars for a guy that just wanted to get off early.
And it's universal too. Again, going back to Russia, you know, a lot of the stuff we see going on in Russia, we're falsifying different maintenance reports, you know, training report, all this, you know, it's just up the whole chain of command. It's just falsifying a whole bunch of records. And maybe they're more corrupt than the U.S. is, but also a lot of it just comes down to human nature, it seems, right? Like people are lazy.
Well, it's not necessarily they're lazy. They're just trying. I feel like when it comes to maintenance, they're just trying to go home, man. I just want to go home. I've been here all day, and you're telling me that I can't go home because I'm waiting for this fucking O-ring to show up? Like, why? Just use whatever. Go grab this piece of toilet paper and shove it in there. I don't care. I'm ready to go home.
Right.
Submarines are a little bit different because generally if you do that, you're going to kill yourself, right? But if you're a shipyard worker, you don't give a fuck. You're not going out there with those guys. You're not going to die, right? Or if you're a surface guy, you can. There's so many people that you can just kind of blame whoever, especially if you're not following paperwork, which you're obviously not doing anyways. If you're, you know, shoving toilet paper in O-ring holes, right? But yeah, I mean, it's so easy to fail, and that was one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this on the show, is because I don't want to sit here and shit on the Navy, right? Like, I don't want to sit here and say the Navy's not doing what they're supposed to do, that they're failing, they're on fire, right? Every system has its failures, and I want to make sure that, especially the U.S. Navy, because they, you know, I'm part of them. I'm an alumni, right? And they defend me. I want to make sure that they're doing the right job, but you got to call them out, right? You got to make sure that they say, you know, we're not doing the right job. You step back to Russia again, right? If you have a state media, if you have an entire kind of thought process around, don't say anything.
Yeah, not only that, but like a cult of personality almost around Putin, right? Where he almost can't do anything wrong. And if he approved all these different things, you know, it couldn't possibly be because anything he did or is in control of went wrong. It must be something else.
Right.
So if you can't criticize the system, then nothing is ever going to get fixed or changed.
Right.
It's just going to keep happening again and again in the future.
Right.
But I think that about wraps it up. We got to cover a couple different interesting topics, at least, you know, some that I find interesting, and obviously you're very passionate about from, you know, personal experience. But,
yeah, sorry if I got a little ranty.
No.
Maintenance is kind of my deal. I loved it, you know. So.
But if you want to try to help support this channel, go onto our Patreon. We'll have it down in the description. Also, that Patreon is different than my own personal one, the Covert at Covert Cabal. This one is actually for both of us. We're going to make sure we split that money and use it because we'll put some pictures in here, but our whole studio here, we have a pretty complicated setup. All the wires, 3 different cameras, all these different lights with it, monitors everywhere, switchboards.
Yeah, it may sound weird, but we spent tens of thousands of dollars on this studio
Totally, yeah.
setup. I definitely want to make this sustainable because I would like to add more stuff to it.
Yeah.
Go out and do things and let's go out to Groton. Let's go see these submarines. Let's go do this. Let's go do that. But, can't necessarily do that if we don't have sustainable income, because what we've seen from YouTube is they love to demonetize us. So we can't just rely on, YouTube advertisements and super chats and stuff like that, because who knows what YouTube's going to do to us. So.
Yep. So if you're in the position, go ahead and check out our Patreon and consider, supporting us there. Other than that, that about wraps it up. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching.